Usually we have more people, but can you all hear me okay? Yep, okay.
Yes.
All right, so exciting times. First, I'd like to start by welcoming Robin Gilden to this commission. Where's Dr. Gilden? Hello, hello. And you were appointed by the governor to be on this commission's as the public health expert. Would you like to share a little bit about yourself, just to introduce yourself?
Well, I come from the University of Maryland School of Nursing, and I am trying to fill very big shoes of my dean, Dean Kirschling. And my research is in environmental health, pesticides, and climate change. And I'm a huge advocate for nursing involvement in climate change policy. So I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
Welcome. Happy that you're here with us. I'd also like to acknowledge Peter Goodwin. Hello, hello. Congratulations on your retirement. Just happy to see you and thank you for your outstanding service. I went to your retirement party, so yay. Very nice. All right.
So just for a minute, I'm so pleased that Robin has been appointed, and so I'm going to step away because she's taking my spot. And I'm retiring as well.
Okay.
So you all have a great meeting, and congratulations, Robin.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Okay. It was nice. So we're heading into the most important time of the year for this commission as we are trying to work to develop the most important thing, which is the annual report. So we're going to talk about that today, right? In a little bit. So I do want to share just a few updates from MED. So I wanted to just talk quickly about last week, or was it this week? Time flies. It was actually this week, Sunday until Tuesday. I was in New York at the, as you all are probably familiar, U.S. Climate Week. It was really great times seeing everyone come together and talk about how do we accelerate and move together as a country, states, to climate goals. So I was really happy to be a part of that. While I was there, I signed two things. One, the ZEB Declaration, which is a global coalition, and it's basically, it was a no-brainer for Maryland. I signed on behalf of Maryland. So basically, we signed, this agreement says that our state, Maryland, will reach new car sales by 2035, ZEB, so electric vehicles. So that was easy. We have that. That's real consistent with the advanced clean cars. So again, it's a no-brainer. So wanted to share that. Then the other thing I signed was the Under Two Coalition. Are you all familiar with that? Okay, good. So that's the largest global coalition of governments, and they're committed to reaching net zero by 2050. So no brainer, because we are trying to do it a little faster than that, 2045. So that was exciting for me to sign on behalf of us, Maryland. So just wanted to let you know about that. I wanted to talk quickly about the listening tours that we are having. As you all know, we have the Maryland Climate Pathway Report. It was released last June. Since then, we promised to have listening sessions, and we've been having them. I think we've had about 6 so far. Hundreds of people have shown up and really talked about their concerns and what they'd like to see in the final report. Really good information. We went to Bowie, Hagerstown, Salisbury, Baltimore, Prince Frederick, and online folks attended as well. So it's really what we've been reminded is the Marylanders, they want our state to take swift and responsible action to mitigate the impacts of climate change. And we're very clear, very vocal about that. We have another listening session if any of you would like to come to it. I think it's next week, the 26th. Where's that one?
That one's online.
Well, it's easy to attend that one. No excuse. Expect to see everybody. No, I'm kidding. Yeah, so please feel free to attend that. So what we're planning to do is bring everything that we're hearing from those listening sessions to state agencies here represented, as well as the governor's office. And we're going to use that as we develop the greenhouse gas reduction plan that's due in December. I think that's it. That's all I have to say. Would you care to say any remarks?
Thank you. This chair is really strange for me too.
Me too.
Whoever's playing a joke, enough is enough.
I feel like a hobbit. Anyway, it's great to have you all here and I'm looking forward to a good, robust conversation again from this group. So thanks for the time. Thanks.
I need to go down a little bit more.
There are like 20 switches on the
That helps.
chairs.
Ah,
It was
normal.
switch 17 is the one.
All right. I will mention one of the things that came out of the listening sessions is the funding issues. So everyone's wondering, Maryland, how are we going to fund all that's needed to make this transition happen? And so that's why we're going to be talking about some funding ideas and background. I'm going to turn that over to you. And I know that's going to be a real topic, the funding and the transition, right? So that's important for us to really understand where we are.
That's right. Thanks. And for those I haven't met yet, I'm Mark Stewart. I run the climate change program at MDE. Filling in as your facilitator today, Chris Oakland, their director, is in New York for some meetings. Absolutely right, Secretary McElwain. Funding is the main thing on the agenda today. But before we get to that very important topic, I wanted to address some things about the annual report. So each year, one of the most important things that this commission does is put together an annual report that includes policy recommendations that go to the governor and the General Assembly to accelerate climate action and address climate change in Maryland. That report is due by December 15th this year. The working groups are currently working to finalize their policy recommendations for this year's annual report, for consideration of this year's annual report. The working groups themselves, they advance recommendations to this commission, and then you, in your vote, in the voting process to approve the annual report, decide if you want to advance those recommendations from the working groups. The commission is scheduled to review and discuss the working group's recommendations during its next meeting on October 23rd. The staff requests to receive recommendations as early as possible from the working groups. We're aware that the mitigation working group's final recommendations might not be decided until the MWG's meeting on October 19th. So we're apologizing in advance that it's going to be very, very, very close to the October 23rd meeting before we're able to send the kind of discussion draft of your annual report and recommendations for consideration on October 23rd. As recommendations come in, we can also try to get them out to you so that you can see these recommendations in advance.
Mark,
Yes.
we need to push the meeting back if it's going to be that tight? Or is that a no-go?
We could attempt the
Logistics are
dramatic rescheduling logistics. I think that because we have some recommendations coming out of the mitigation working group already that we are able to forward along, there might be just, it's hard to guess how many recommendations the MWG will approve it in their final meeting. But it could be safe to say that we can get all of the recommendations to the commission members well in advance. And then there might be just a few additional ones that would be approved at the MWG meeting on the 19th to add to that list.
Okay.
So, you know, we'll do our best to make it manageable so that you can see them and begin digesting them before that meeting. David?
Did you say October 23rd?
It's a Monday, yeah, October 23rd. That's an additional
Okay.
meeting that we
I
scheduled.
didn't hear us either. Okay, good. I feel better. It wasn't on mine.
Is that not on?
No.
calendar?
No.
Okay.
So if you can change it, then it's not there already.
logistics may be okay.
Good
Oh,
to
that's
know.
not good.
Yeah.
So our staff will make sure that it winds up on everyone's calendars. Sorry if that wasn't already sent out. Now, of course, commission members sometimes make recommendations outside of the working group process. In those cases, the commission or the commission steering committee typically decides if a recommendation should be reviewed by a working group or if it can just move straight into the commission's draft annual report. You might get some practice at this decision-making today because we expect to hear some recommendations on the topic of how to fund climate action And if we hear, or as we hear recommendations today, you may need to decide if those recommendations should be reviewed by one of our 4 established working groups, or if there is enough agreement to at least move it forward into the draft annual report for further review and discussion at a future meeting of the commission.
Can I make one comment while
Mhm.
you're looking at that?
Yep.
In terms of funding, I just want to bring this up again. It's really clear that in order for us to meet the goals that we have, which are so bold and so aggressive, wonderful, we really do need to figure out how will we fund all of this? Because when you look at the modeling, it's actually required, right? And so I just ask that we think real critically, strategically for options and what can we do to make this work? Industry need us. I mean, you just can't do this without money. And so I just wanted to just put that out there again. It's the most important thing one of the most important things that we need to really focus on.
Thank you.
Mhm.
So where all this is leading on the schedule is that on November 9th, that's the date, which should hopefully be on your calendars. Do confirm that for me. Where we are scheduled to hold the commission's final vote, which would be when you see your draft annual report and all of the recommendations in one place, and would vote to approve that annual report and recommendations. Typically what happens for that meeting is that in advance of the meeting, commission members say, I think recommendation 3 needs more discussion, so on and so forth. And we flag items for discussion. And then anything that's not flagged for further discussion is just part of a consensus docket. And we accept, okay, then those are approved and let's only discuss the ones that people have flagged for further discussion. So this is laying some groundwork for a couple months out from now. So no worries if you forget all of this, but I just wanted to lay out kind of the typical voting process that the commission goes through. The annual report, we strive for consensus on this commission and require a supermajority vote to approve the annual report. That's at least 60% of commission members who are present voting in favor. Are there any questions in terms of just the process and timeline? Yep.
So given the November 9th vote, and that you've had these listening sessions and people also submitted testimony, about when can we expect summaries or copies of comments or what happened in those different town hall meetings?
Yeah, great question. So we've been collecting written comments for the last few months now on the Pathway report. We are closing the written comment period on October 15th, and next week's meeting is the last listening session. So we will, after October 15th, post all of the written comments that we've received, and be able to provide a summary of what we've heard in the listening sessions.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions just in terms of commission timeline and process?
Is the November 7th day on your calendars?
The ninth.
I mean, 9th. Yes, thank you. Okay, perfect.
Would any of the working group chairs or co-chairs want to say just briefly and in general terms, what some of the topics are emerging in the working groups in terms of recommendations that the commission could look forward to receiving in the next few weeks?
Is Josh here? Secretary Kurtz? Online, maybe he can give us the first.
I'm not.
Secretary Kurtz, are you here online? Or someone representing that office, that agency?
He said he was supposed to be online. He wasn't able to attend in person, but I can give a quick summary of the recommendations for us.
That'd be great.
We had broad topics that we were happy to narrow it down if they were going to be covered by other working groups. Our first was to incorporate JEDI priorities and milestones into state agency annual reports on greenhouse gas reduction and the impacts of climate change. Our second is to integrate climate change to local comprehensive plans. Our third is to form an interagency funding task force as a subgroup under the ARWG to implement the priorities identified in the Next Generation Adaptation Plan. Number 4 was to amend the education code to include climate change curriculum in schools. And number 5 was to provide funding for those with cultural competency to communicate and discuss climate change in low-income communities. And again, those are broad. We will be honing in on exact wording and priority recommendations in future discussions.
Great, thank you. Jabari or Amy, do you want to provide any insight into what ECO is thinking about for this year?
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. One of the things that we have been discussing lately in our work group was, it's a part of a recommendation that we actually had from last year. We know how critical it is that Marylanders know about climate change, how they could impact them and their communities, but also about the efforts that we currently have in place in the state of Maryland. So the ECO working group felt that we should reemphasize our recommendation to that Maryland Department of Environment include a budget of about $5 million to develop a statewide public awareness campaign that will include interactive website, various ads, billboards, etc., that will highlight the resources and state and federal incentives to help Marylanders become part of the climate solution, as well as steps to take that, steps that citizens could take to personally reduce their footprint. So that's one of the things that we're discussing right now. Now, where that money comes from exactly, that's not our decision, but we felt like about $5 million for that public awareness campaign.
Well, we will solve the funding question today. By 3 p.m., we'll have that
Right.
locked down.
Okay.
I like that idea. Thank you. I really do. That recommendation.
Kim or Mike, do you want to give in very broad, brief terms what might come from the MWG this year?
Yeah, I'll start.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Let's see. So the main focus the mitigation work group has done this whole year has been on transportation, and in particular, incentivizing the purchasing of electric vehicles. We've also have recommendations around the advanced clean truck rule and Clean Cars 2, and making sure those programs are put forward through the state. So a lot on transportation and how to incentivize that, including fleets and buses and trucks. There's a series of recommendations that the Office of People's Counsel is putting forward. Is that on the, I see, is that on today's agenda?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, what was, and sorry, very quick agenda setting because it's germane to what you're talking about. So within the course of today's funding discussion, and as we heard from our meeting, the last Climate Commission meeting, Commission members David Lab and David Smedik suggested some specific topics for focus within that funding discussion. So we have kind of embedded presentations and discussions within that funding piece today. That's right.
Okay, great. There's a recommendation to remove the exemption for manufacturing from the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Act, which was put in place when the law first passed. And what am I missing? What else, Mike?
Yeah, I just say that these are very robust discussions. We're actually having to add another meeting in order to get it in. I mean, we have something like, is it 12 or 14 recommendations just on funding transportation incentives alone. We've got some more recommendations coming in on buildings, and we're going to be dealing with some of those building recommendations, including, I think, some recommendations from OPC at one of the additional meetings that were added. One of the things we're wrestling with is that we've got so many recommendations for things like transportation incentives, and some of the consultants we asked to look at it came back with suggestions on amount of fundings that were not particularly realistic to expect that we could come up with that amount of money on those issues. But we have taken votes on a number of incentives, and we will be making detailed recommendations to the commission as a whole on a number of these issues of where we think additional incentives and additional measures should be implemented.
Great, thank you. And let me ask, Dr. Goodwin, if there's anything that you want to mention in terms of STWG's contributions, and then Charmaine, I see your hands up, so we'll go to you right after Dr. Goodwin.
So we met last week to go through draft recommendations. We took to heart the direction from the commission and from MDE. Don't have a huge number of recommendations. So part of the discussion was just to acknowledge the recommendations that MDE or the state had taken from the science recommendations last year. It's quite remarkable the number of things that have been acted on. So that was going to be our introduction. And we just have 3 recommendations at the moment. The first was, which appeared last year, to look to supplement the current funds that will accelerate the technologies that will make a difference. So we're suggesting that there would be a budget where the state agencies decide what the priorities are. And then there would be a competitive process that the universities are very good at handling. So that was the first one. The second is, Dr. Gilden, great to see you. Jane and Amir have been working on thinking that the last update of human health impacts is a few years old now. There's so much more information that there's a recommendation there to do an update of that, particularly in the light of what's happened in the US this last year with the attribution of mortality, people dying and getting misdiagnosed when it's really been extreme heat. And so there's been a lot of applications out this year. But on the broader discussion, just to update the great work that MD has on those pages about the implication of climate change to human health, it's probably worth an update of that. And the third is perhaps not from STWG, you alone, this could be ARWG or ECO, but just perhaps broadening the definition for underserved and overburdened community to include people with disabilities. And the state does a lot of things, but just to be a little more explicit that this is being included in the thinking. So those are the 3 recommendations that we expect to see STWG confirm next week.
Great.
Thanks. And Charmaine.
So while the CJ Climate Justice Steering Committee is not technically a working group, climate justice is obviously a very, very important issue for the state. And so this year, for the first time, the Climate Justice Steering Committee will be putting forth recommendations that seek to address the inaccessibility of information that can be trusted by communities that are low income and historically marginalized. So we really want to see misinformation, misunderstanding, and miseducation addressed. And while we know, I was wonderful to hear what ECO plans to put forth, while we know that there will be a cost in terms of funding activities and actions, if we don't do that, there is a cost, which is, I think, what Dr. Goodwin just mentioned. There is a human cost in action. And so this year we are planning to put forth recommendations that seek to get the communities more involved with education. The other piece that we will be putting forth is ways to address the issue of disabilities. As we think about the multifaceted, diverse communities that we are serving and vastly growing diversity in the state, we have to recognize that there are hundreds of thousands of residents with disabilities. And so we are going to be putting forth some recommendations there as well. So again, while we don't operate technically as a working group, we have been focused on climate justice issues in the state. And so this year, for the first time, we will be putting forth a set of recommendations.
Great.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Looking forward to seeing those.
So let's move to the funding discussion. And as we head into this, I want to set some context. Of course, the Climate Commission isn't the only group even established in statute in Maryland that's talking about how do you fund this transition. Just a quick note and a reminder that MDE and MEA are co-chairing a building energy transition implementation task force that on the same timeline that this commission has, by the end of this year, we'll be making recommendations around funding and providing financial support for decarbonizing specifically the building sector, right? So that's just an example of several of one process that's unfolding that's looking at this issue as well. We shared some of these slides, at MDE, we assembled just a very short slide deck as a kind of a teaser for this conversation. In reaction to those slides, which were actually on the agenda for the previous meeting, we ran out of time, but we started to get some questions about, well, what about federal funding? How's federal funding kind of fitting into this right now? So actually where we wanted to start this funding conversation is by inviting Hannah Cooper, Deputy Director of Federal Relations in the Executive Office of the Governor, to provide an update to the commission on the federal funding that Maryland has received and applied for to date. So Hannah, if you're able to unmute and jump in, I'll be happy to screen share for you.
Yeah, that would be great. Hi, everyone. Hannah Cooper. As mentioned, I'm the Deputy Director of Federal Affairs in the Governor's Office. So starting this year, obviously, the governor has set up our federal investment team. So each agency has a representative, joins on a bi-weekly basis, and we talk about, discuss the different funding opportunities that are available through the federal government. So through the notice of funding opportunities, whether it be competitive, whether it be formula funding. So we've been working to bring as many federal dollars to Maryland as possible. So to date, I believe in one of the slides, since we started in April 2023, we've brought in more than $400 million to the state. That's across agencies. And this also gives our agencies the ability to work together and start collaborating more. So we have MEA working with MDE, DNR, MDEM is in there as well. A lot of the electric charging notice of funding opportunities. MDOT is working with MEA. So it's really been a great opportunity for the agencies to work together and maximize our federal funding and make our grant applications more competitive.
Thanks. Do you want me to advance slides?
Yeah, that would be great. So this is the federal funding that has been passed in the past couple of years. So, we had the American Rescue Plan, which was our last COVID bill, the bipartisan infrastructure law, which we're bringing a lot of money to the state through, the NDAA, our consolidated appropriations, our yearly appropriations. We also have the CHIPS and Science Act and the Inflation Reduction Act. So a lot of money flowing through the federal government. Next slide. So yes, as we see, grants through the bipartisan infrastructure law is a big one. Inflation Reduction Act, more coming out of that as well. We're also seeing a bunch of tax credits. So through the elective pay process, direct payment process, Treasury is starting to put out guidance on those. So making sure our agencies are briefed up and know how they can use those funds or use those credits. Next slide.
Hannah, this is Kim. So the numbers on this graph are the number of grants, or is this the funding level?
So these were the number of grants that came through the different bills.
Okay, thank you.
So yes, as I mentioned, this is the federal investment team is a centralized structure for pursuing federal investment opportunities. It's an opportunity for collaboration between the agencies and also gives folks, kind of a single point of contact in the governor's office. And this is the layout of how we do it obviously starts at the top with the governor, lieutenant governor, Matt Verghese, my director, and then our two deputy chiefs, Johnny, or two of our deputy chiefs, Johnny and Shayna, and then each of the agency designees. Next slide.
Hi there, Hannah. I'm happy to jump in. This is Allison Jaden. I'm a special projects manager at MDE, and I'm sorry, everybody, that I'm not able to join you today. I did want to provide a quick snapshot of MDE's work on federal grants and really applaud and share our enthusiasm about just how wonderful it has been to have the collaboration led by the governor's office. We did just have our FIT meeting this morning. And at each meeting, there are opportunities that are raised to bring a lot of coordination and idea sharing and a lot of learning across the different agencies. To date in 2023, MDE has submitted about $270 million in federal grants, and we've heard back on 3 of those having been awarded. We're also looking ahead at grants that are due in the next coming months, including the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, the Solar for All competition, which is being led by the Maryland Clean Energy Center, and we're excited to be collaborating with them along with several other state agencies. And then just announced yesterday was the Climate Pollution Reduction Grant for implementation from the EPA. The NOFO came out yesterday, and I will be hopping to the EPA's webinar after this meeting to learn more about how we bring those resources to Maryland to reduce climate pollution. So, you know, it's been a really great learning opportunity for all the state agencies to come together and really build those partnerships across the different sectors for pursuing these funds. And I'll turn it over. Heather, our colleague at MEA, is in the room with you all, and we'll turn it, Mark, to the next slide, and she'll provide a brief update about MEA's work to date on our federal funding.
Good morning. I thought I would move out from behind the pillar where I was hiding. As many of you know, the Maryland Energy Administration is the state energy office, and from the BIL and the IRA, we've been giving a lot of formula funding that's been coming from the Department of Energy. So the 7 grants that are listed here are formula funding that are specifically for MEA as the state energy office. All of them have some component of energy efficiency or energy conservation as part of it that's dictated for building the programs. We have 2 that are currently awarded, and the programs are currently under development. We are currently working on the applications for the state-based home energy efficiency contractor training grants, which are to help the home efficiency rebate program and the home electrification and appliance rebate program, both coming from the IRA, and both directly for residents and homes, and again, for that energy efficiency and electrification piece. Next slide.
I'm sorry, can I ask a question?
Certainly.
How much was awarded on the modernize the electric grid? Out of the 19?
I think it was about 7 million.
Okay.
I would just add that breakout of all would be nice if you can give us
You have the breakout of all of it, all of those?
just a graph even to just kind of understand.
I can certainly work on that and get
Okay.
back to you guys.
And I think that'd be awesome for every agency. So whoever is in charge of that.
I will add and jump in on that one. Hannah could add more, is that all the state agencies are reporting quarterly to DBM as required about the grant awards. So Hannah, maybe we could coordinate on how to make sure that information is shared with the commission.
Yes, that's great. We can do that.
Another avenue that we've noticed for federal funding are the various letters of support requests that have come to MEA from the various organizations and other state agencies that are pursuing federal funding. With the list here are the ones that we're still waiting to hear if they've had a successful application, but it ranges from renewable energy sources for such as for offshore wind or for solar, as well as, and also a hydrogen, a potential hydrogen hub in the area. And there's also been energy efficiency grants as well, such as the Buildings Upgrade Prize and the Renew America's nonprofits. And with that, I will give it back to you, Hannah.
Wonderful. Can we do next slide? Yeah, so as I mentioned, since the FIT was created in April 2023, Maryland agencies have been awarded more than $400 million in federal funding. So here are just a few. We got a $20 million RAISE grant. MDH received $2.5 million for the CDC BOLD grant. MDEM has received $6.5 million for the Safeguarding Tomorrow revolving loan fund program. MD Labor, $6.6 million for registered apprenticeships. And then DNR has also received over $500,000 for the wildlife disease prevention program. So these are just a few, but again, I think as Allison said, you can view all of these online. And this is our contact information. If folks want to get in touch with us, we're always happy to help in, any way we can.
Great. Thank you very much for coming and presenting that to the commission today. And I want to pivot to the slide deck that that MDE prepared just to help kick off the conversation about funding. So bear with me a second as I pull up a different deck.
Mark, I have a question for the State House team, if that's allowable.
Yeah, sorry to breeze right past that. I'm sorry. Feel free. Any questions that you have for the presenters?
Right. So I really appreciate the information on the grants. That's terrific that we're taking advantage of all the federal, largesse that's being offered to states and local governments and nonprofits and community organizations out there. That's a must, and it looks like we're doing a terrific job of that. But one thing I didn't hear about, and I'd like to know if we're doing it, is congressional directed funding and centralizing an ask from the state government to our congressional delegation. I know that in local government, our congressional delegations often reach out to us to understand what our requests are, what our plans are, to see if there are earmarks, what used to be called earmarks, but now it's congressional directed funding, so they can put those things in the federal budgets and have that come down to the local governments. And I know the governor meets on a regular basis, certainly formally annually, but informally more frequent than that with the congressional delegation as a group in Washington. I'm just curious if the State House has thought about maybe consolidating a climate directed, congressional directed funding request to the legislatures at the federal level, because certainly some of the cost and projects that are being put forth to meet our greenhouse gas reduction goals would fall into projects that the federal government could fund. So I'm thinking that's something that you might have thought about or could think about if you haven't already done that.
I'm sorry, Hannah had to leave for another meeting, but I certainly I'll answer briefly with what I know, and then ask for her to share some more details with the commission about how that process works. But certainly she and her director, Matt, are in communication of that nature to make asks. But I do think the work of this group to share those priorities is helpful. And so I think the conversation here about identifying the funding priorities and then utilizing this really effective means of that single point of communication through to the governor's office is really something I hope can all be leaning into together. But I can get some more details from Hannah about what efforts they've been making on that front and what successes they've had to date. But they certainly are in communication across the board with all of the stakeholders they need to. But yes, I think direction and ideas about where the priorities need to go to help fund this climate activity that we need to do is very important.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer as that we start focusing on that looking forward. It's really hard to come up with specific recommendations for funding without a list of specific projects that we're funding. If we saw a specific list, then we could come up with some really good ideas on how to address each one of them. Some of them are going to be public sector, some are going to be private sector, some are going to, the public sector ones, some are going to be more appropriate at the federal or the state or the local level. There's a lot of, dividing up there that could be done as we approach the problem.
And one thing that MDE is tasked with to satisfy the requirements of applying for the Climate Pollution Reduction Grant Program is that by the end of March 2024, we need to come up with a prioritized list of decarbonization projects in the state, which winds up essentially, although Allison's going to read that NOFO and
I hate to break it to you, Mark, it's due on March 1, but
March 1.
I think everybody in this room and on this call, we can use all the help we can get to assemble those priorities of implementation ready measures. And I have been scanning the NOFO. They're looking for action that can be quantified between 2025 and 2030. So we have ambitious goals, and I think the federal government is pushing us to meet those ambitious goals.
Yeah, I know my county and many others are very fortunate to have been on the receiving end of some of that congressional directed funding. That's been very helpful. And if we could do that centralized away from the state government regarding climate change, I think that would get us part of the way there.
Kim, I think Allison may have put a link in the chat that may answer your question.
Thank you.
Yes, I linked in the chat the Maryland Clearinghouse and does have posted all of the grant information for all the grants across the state. It has been a treasure trove for me to see what types of opportunities folks across the state are accessing. So definitely we'll share the link out for those who are can't see it on the computer screen.
Thanks so much, Allison. I'm going to walk fairly quickly through these slides. They were shared with you all for the last meeting, so no changes to the slide deck, but we didn't have an opportunity to present them and then talk through them. So let me do so quickly. Want to touch just briefly on the cost of inaction, the investments that may be needed to achieve really the world's climate goals, let alone the states. How catalyzing private investment can be done through public investment, how other states are putting climate budgets together, and then of course saving plenty of time for discussion. And then again, as I mentioned earlier, in that discussion, I think that we'll have some kind of targeted reaction and presentations from David Lab and David Smetic. So the cost of inaction, several studies have indicated that the economic impact, if you wanted to boil everything down into dollars, could be as great as 10% of the size of the global economy is the cost of inaction if we don't address climate change. Just as some more localized examples, the estimated annual cost of sea level rise and coastal storms could increase to be $11 to $17 billion per year in just the Northeast region of the U.S. By the end of this century. A number of people have tried to estimate, well, what's the cost of action, right? How much investment is needed to achieve the Paris commitment goals? And several studies have come back suggesting that might be on the order of around 3% of global GDP would be the investment needed to achieve the global goals of the Paris climate commitment. If you were to downscale that to a state like Maryland, we have a $500 billion economy in Maryland, so that's about a $15 billion investment per year, perhaps, if that downscaling were appropriate to do at a state level. Now, note that this does not necessarily mean the state's budget for climate action, right? This is investments of all types. And it's very hard to figure out what are our current investments of all types now. We know that Marylanders are going out today, buying EVs, installing EV chargers at home, installing heat pumps at home, improving insulation at home. So are building owners. Industry is rapidly decarbonizing in Maryland, so on and so forth. There's a lot of investment happening, right? We're investing in public transit. That's some significant public dollars in decarbonization activities. So there's a lot of investment happening. What's the total amount of investment in Maryland? That's really difficult to pin down. So we don't have a good answer to that. But what our studies suggesting could be the approximate scale of total investment in public and private funding, possibly up in ballpark of $15 billion a year. In the work that the University of Maryland has done to look at the pathway to achieve Maryland's climate goals and the net economic impacts of achieving that pathway, they found that as we invest in a clean energy future, as we make the investments that are in fact necessary according to the modeling to achieve a 60% reduction by 2031, we wind up achieving significant health and economic benefits, including having up to 1,000 fewer cases of upper and lower respiratory symptoms, saving up to 51 lives, having 16,500 fewer days of restricted activity from pollution, growing the economy, or having just the health benefits in the economy equal to $1 to $2.5 billion in health benefits through 2031, creating 16,700 jobs, and increasing personal income by $1.5 billion statewide. So those are some of the economic and public health outcomes of the modeling that was done for the pathway report, which is just, some indication that, of course, there are many benefits and co-benefits to investing in a clean energy future. And we also know that leveraging public funding for private investment is a proven and successful strategy. A study came out recently looking at just some initial amount of funding that came out through the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and Inflation Reduction Act of one tranche of $299 billion that entered the U.S. economy had already by that date some months ago stimulated more than $500 billion in private investment directly connected to those dollars. So we know that public investment mobilizes private investment. How are other states putting their climate budgets together? We looked at a few examples in preparation for this discussion. We noticed that New York in the last fiscal year had a $4.2 billion climate budget. If we were to, on a per capita basis, compare that to Maryland, that would be approximately a $1.4 billion climate budget in Maryland. Minnesota is spending actually a little bit more than New York on a per capita basis. So Maryland's equivalent to Minnesota's $2 billion budget would be about a $2.2 billion budget. And California, mostly driven by the investments that they're able to make through their Cap and Invest program, are spending more than $1,000 per capita on in their climate budget, and Maryland's equivalent in that case would be about a $7.6 billion climate budget. So we wanted to offer that up just as kind of a teaser to the funding conversation. We have a few potential guiding questions. I have a sense that based on the reaction that we've already received over the last several weeks, you all don't need a lot of guiding questions to get the conversation started. So with that, let me first ask if you have any questions or thoughts about anything that's been presented so far. And then perhaps after any clarifying points, we can get into the ideas that you might have. And again, we have two commissioners that have already indicated an interest in sharing, specifically presenting their ideas. So if we get into past clarifying questions, I might first turn to David Lapp to present what he has forwarded in a slide deck to you all regarding one funding aspect of this whole thing.
Can I ask a question?
Yep.
How do you calculate the 16,500 fewer days?
Yeah, there's some tools that our consultants have used. One tool is a tool called COBRA that is looking at the public health benefits of emission reductions. So I think that the health benefits were calculated using the COBRA tool, and the economic benefits were calculated by the Regional Economic Studies Institute at Towson University, and that's based on a macroeconomic model that they use called REMI.
Okay. I mean, there's not 16,500 days between now and 2031. That's, I'm a little confused. How?
Total employees.
Total.
Probably.
If you add up all the employees.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
FTEs.
Thanks for jumping on that. Delegate Stein.
Thanks, Mark. this presentation is very helpful. Do we have a sense, do we have an estimate as to what Maryland, say in our fiscal year 23 budget, spending on climate?
I was thinking the same.
That seems like an easy question, and that we would have an answer to it. We are actually many months into a study guided by faculty at the University of Maryland to help analyze what is the state currently spending on measures that reduce greenhouse gas emissions and co-pollutants, and what percentage of that funding is benefiting disproportionately affected communities. That is a difficult number to pin down, because it's what the researchers are doing is diving into department budgets to look at how is money spent on those sort of activities. So we are still some months away from being able to conclude that work.
So results at the end of the year?
I believe that, do you happen to remember when we're
Due by the end of the year.
It's definitely due by the end of the year. I feel like we're going to actually have the results as best as we're going to have them for this year, maybe by the end of October.
Okay.
I'll get back to you on the
This is
date.
Maya down at College Park.
This is Professor Phil Joyce in the School of Public Policy, who's the PI on what we're calling the state spending analysis.
I'm gonna call on Kevin and Mark, but I do want to say that is a very good question. And for me, I would think that we would have that. But maybe it's easier to at least, and this is just me throwing this out, know do we not know what MEA is spending and the contribution that we're making, MDE? I don't know. I mean, that's just an idea. Trying to get MDOT and all the other state agencies together, that might be a little harder, but we should have that information, I think, available. It should be easy to get, but that's just how I'm looking at it.
Could be.
It should be easy.
Yeah.
I mean, particularly with MEA, with all the grants and all the money that they're getting from Reggie, right? So all that money is supposed to go toward these climate actions. So if nothing else, we should have those numbers and the money that we're giving. So I'd like for us to at least have that information.
That's right. And some of the biggest pieces of the funding or of the spending picture are well known in terms of CEF and other major buckets that probably are doing most of the work from a state spending perspective. Yet the challenge for the analysis is a complete and comprehensive picture. This was part of the Climate Solutions Now Act. These are it's a study requirement within that. So we are several months into this, trying to figure out what the total spending picture is.
MEA does have a good sense. I don't have it off the top of my head, but we allocate our resources according to the legislature's formulas, and so we have a pretty good idea.
Kevin, and then Mark, and then Rebecca.
Mine is a clarifying question about the next discussion. So I can wait.
Oh, you sure? Okay. All right.
I wanted to kind of give the converse question to Delegate Stein's question, where he asked about Maryland's spending in the 23 budget. We must obviously know how New York, Minnesota, and California spent the numbers we're seeing in the chart here. Otherwise, we wouldn't see those numbers. Obviously, innovation is really important, and we're going to need to have innovative ways of resolving our problem. But to a large extent, our problem can also be solved by not reinventing the wheel. And if we know how these other states spent their money on climate, that would be helpful as part of our discussion to see how other states have addressed it. We must know how those states done it because we have numbers.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't have them handy. My team did try to disaggregate those budgets a little bit and look at some of the spending.
Yeah.
And importantly, to note, not all of those, the spending within those climate budgets are necessarily for things that are narrowly considered greenhouse gas emission reduction projects, right? There's also some adaptation and resilience investments, water infrastructure, so on and so forth.
So they're not really apples to apples for what we'll have to spend on a prorated basis.
Well, I mean, I think
So important.
This funding conversation should be looked at very broadly, right? We have real needs to fund adaptation and resilience. So, I think that because of the requirements of the Climate Solutions Now Act and putting very aggressive GHG reduction goals in front of us, that's been this year really the focus. How do we fund that clean energy transition?
Yeah.
But let's not step back or become too focused and say, and not allow space for adaptation and resilience, which is critical.
Couldn't agree more, but I'm just saying, if we could see how those states did it to get to that number, that might be instructive to some degree.
Thank you. Secretary Flora?
Hi, I'm just clarifying before we get into the real discussion, but on the economy portion of the slide, do you know if the modeling broke down net? And so I think in terms of being prepared for sort of other views of this investment, which might present, well, how many jobs are we losing? It would be good to understand if the 16.7 is sort of a net, or it's, because I think we're gonna have to factor that in as we begin to sort of push out and look for funding and whatnot. And I think related to that, under health benefits, really all three of those categories under economy, do you know if the modeling broke down sort of by demographic group? So for instance, do we have a sense of health benefits, related to our most vulnerable populations? Is it proportionally high versus jobs created might proportionally skew in another direction versus personal income skewing in yet another direction? So I think as we will ultimately be in a position of advocating, understanding that next level of breakout would be really helpful if that's available through the modeling.
It is, and great questions. And yes, those are net. So what we have in the modeling results is a breakdown. What does that look like in different job classifications, right? And yes, there are some classification job types where we see some decreases, and then on net, because of growth in other sectors. Same with the public health results. We have that broken out in terms of public health benefits per county. And what we saw in the results is that, of course, the counties that have, was it by county or census? I think it was by county. The counties that have today the higher levels of emissions achieve or see the greatest improvements, of course, because most of those emission reductions will be occurring there. So some of that is laid out deep in the Pathways report, and some of it is additional modeling results that we have available.
Yeah, that's really great to know, because I think it's gonna be really making a case ultimately.
Okay. Yes.
Another detailed question here. I'm looking at the additional benefits page. So the climate and the health are presented a snapshot of 2031. So is that, and then economy is cumulative. So are the health and climate 1 year in 2031? Or is?
Yeah, you're reading that correctly. So these are readouts of just the health benefits in 2031.
Okay.
So that's a snapshot of 2031 for the health, and then the economy one is a roll up. And frankly, I'd have to go back to the University of Maryland team to remember why it was presented that way. But you're right that it's snapshot versus roll up.
Okay, I think that's important because 51 a year, not 51 over the lifespan. So.
Yes, right.
Okay, thank you.
Well, and it's not in that, because we would have, right.
Right. That's a very good observation. All right. Next.
And you're still
ready for the funding?
Okay.
So my question about the fundraising discussion is, are there parameters, bumpers, third rails, things we should be avoiding? Are there, or is everything on the table?
I think for this group, everything should be on the table. I mean, it's up to us at the end to bump them off. But I think we should be open, bold. Let's talk about it. I mean, really, I want us to be bold and think about, what we can do to bring funding in. Funding ideas. Yeah. You have one? You have a big, bold idea?
I just want to know where we can go.
Let's go as far as, let's
Which
go
dark
there.
paths we're allowed to walk and which ones we're.
You mean
tea or?
Anyone have any reservations to what I just said? Is there anything you feel should be off the table and not even talk about? Speak now, or forever hold it. All right, everything's on the table.
All right. So again, we had a couple commissioners who wanted to jump in with some topics. David Lapp, do you want to discuss the slides that you sent over? And I'm happy to pull them up on the screen if you like.
Sure. Good afternoon, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Great. David Lapp, Office of People's Counsel, and sorry I can't be there today, but appreciate really the opportunity to present here. I wanted to just start out before going to the first slide here, just with a couple preliminary remarks and about the point of the presentation I'm going to give. What we need to understand that when we're talking about state dollars and what the costs of meeting the climate challenge are, we should be considering what ratepayers are paying through their bills and how that money is being spent and whether that money should be repurposed in other ways. We want to make sure that we're not spending money on infrastructure that's potentially going to be stranded. And of course, we want to make sure that customer rates, utility rates are affordable, especially for lower income citizens in Maryland, because we are seeing utility bills rise. So if we can shift ratepayer funding or save ratepayers' costs, that's going to help us economically, and it's going to help us achieve our climate goals. One of the things that we will probably be talking about is using the Empower program, which is a ratepayer funded program to support energy efficiency and other investments. And those costs are significant. So we need to be thinking about, if we're going to increase those costs, we should be also looking at other costs that ratepayers are paying. And especially in the area of fossil fuel spending, which at least there's a strong argument, if a very compelling argument, that some of those investments are not consistent with our meeting our climate goals. So two basic preliminary points here before moving to the first slide. And the first is that utilities are not competitive businesses. They have government granted monopolies and they're subject to pervasive, that's what the Maryland Supreme Court has called it, pervasive government regulation. Customers have no choices other than what the government requires and what it directs the utilities to provide. So what you're going to see reflects how the state is regulating its utilities, and that occurs through the legislature and the Public Service Commission. I don't want to give the impression that OPC or me personally, that we're anti-utility in any way. We need the utilities. We need them to be able to raise the capital to make the necessary infrastructure improvements to provide efficient, reliable services. And so, we need them, but they have private interests. They have investors to please. They have all of our major gas utilities are owned by out-of-state holding companies, and our utilities have to please those managers and executives and ultimately their investors. The second point is that what I'm going to talk about just concerns the delivery portion of your bills, of your gas bills in particular. Your gas bills include a delivery portion and a commodity portion. The commodity portion really is more or less a pass-through to utility customers. The utilities are sort of indifferent as to how much gas is actually consumed. That's not how they earn their profits. How they earn their profits is through the infrastructure. It's not even through operations and maintenance, but it's through the infrastructure. So I'm going to run through some slides now and show you what is going on with gas utility infrastructure spending. And it's going to be abbreviated, and there's going to be a lot of information that I'm going to share, and I'm going to try and keep it as concise as possible. And I want everybody to know that we have lots of reports and other information that's on our website, opc.maryland.gov. So with that, Mark, if you could go to the first slide. This slide is just intended to give a high-level perspective of a gas system. So in Baltimore, for example, there are pipes everywhere under the ground. And a lot of those pipes are quite old. And so in 2013, Maryland passed a statute that is intended to replace all those old pipes. And so that is happening sort of neighborhood by neighborhood. And what you see here, Cedarcroft and Glenham Belhar, I'm not sure if I'm saying that right. Those are two of BGE's current projects, just where they're replacing entire neighborhoods of pipes. So everything, all the legacy pipe in those neighborhoods is being replaced on a wholesale basis. And that's part of a plan that is about 1/3 of the way through. So they're about 10 years through. There's another 20 more years to go, and $3 billion in future cost just for Baltimore Gas and Electric's program. The STRIDE statute provides incentives to make that replacement happen. So if you can go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So this shows some of the costs, and these are projected costs largely based on plans that have been previously filed by the utilities, on file with the Public Service Commission. And this shows that future costs for the STRIDE program are $7.3 billion. That's just what I'm going to call for understanding purposes. You can think about that as the principal, analogous to the principal on your mortgage of your home. So 7.3 million, that does not include the utilities return on that investment. So these investments are recovered over 40, 50, up to 70 years in time. So it's like a 40, 50, 60, 70 year mortgage that you're paying on that 7.3 billion. So an investment made today is going to be paid out all the way up till, in late in the century. So, 70 years from now into the, 2080s. And it's going to be recovered by the utility at what's analogous to an interest rate, except it's higher than an interest rate. It's the utility's rate of return, which after accounting for taxes is generally over 9%. So the total costs for just the future portion of this replacement program is about $17.7 billion. Now, what's important to keep in mind is that this is just sort of an illustration of the gas infrastructure spending, and it's much less than half of the total infrastructure on fossil fuels that is going on right now. So STRIDE is just one category. It's a big category, but there are other categories of spending. For example, new customers. This is all replacing old system, but the utilities continue to expand their existing systems to put on new customers. You can go to the next slide now.
Actually, David, I have a question about that.
Sure.
Sorry, this is Mark, just making sure I'm understanding something. So if STRIDE is less than half of the investments that are being made in gas infrastructure, if I understood that right, then the cost to Marylanders for these infrastructure projects is not just trying to wrap my head around the scale. It's not the 25 billion presented on the slide. It's north of $50 billion.
Yes, I mean, we have, in a couple slides, there'll be some more information on that, but yes, it's significantly more than just the STRIDE costs. the third biggest category of cost, for example, is expansion to new customers and capacity expansion. So for if you see the second bullet on your left here, you can see that BGE's projected spending on new business and expansion. What we I should say, so last year we did a report. Many of you may be aware of it. Last October, we did a gas utility spending report. And we are taking a new look at the numbers 11 months later, and we're seeing that our numbers, as we said in that report, that our numbers in that report were very conservative. What we're re-looking at those numbers now based on actuals and based on new projections, based on filings with the commission. And we can see that our numbers were in fact very conservative, and those numbers have gone up. So last year we had total all-time STRIDE spending at 6.3 billion. It's now at 9.4 billion. And a couple of reasons for that is, one, Washington Gas's STRIDE spending per unit has gone up significantly. Columbia Gas, which is the third largest gas utility in Maryland, they were originally going to end their STRIDE program in 2026, but they're proposing to expand it to a new type of pipe, more recent pipe, and they would, if that is extended out, the program would go on for another 17 years. So those have increased the STRIDE spending. Treasurer Davis, I see you have your hand raised.
Yes, I'm curious. Can you, I think my understanding of STRIDE may be different. So I wanted to see if I can get clarification on it. Is STRIDE some sort of tax or whatever that the utilities are charging for this, or is it money that's being fronted essentially for things that are already going to be, that have to be approved by the Public Service Commission? What I'm getting at between what I'm hearing and what I thought I knew of it is these are all things that they can do currently without STRIDE. What STRIDE does, as opposed to the whole project being done and then they come back through a rate case and get it, all of their permissible costs approved, STRIDE gives them a portion of that money up front to do it. But even if you took away STRIDE, all of this stuff could still be done as long as it's approved by the Public Service Commission, and all of it is cost recoverable. Is that incorrect?
That's generally correct. STRIDE does give them advanced recovery of it, so it serves as a financial incentive for them to accelerate.
But David, what I'm getting at, though, because I don't want the group to be misled, it's not as if you got rid of STRIDE, then this would go away. What it is, it's a switch in the process, as opposed to them getting some money up front to do this. They would have to front all the money themselves, and then on the back end, when they do a rate case, they would get every single penny of this if it was determined to be a prudently incurred cost. All of this money they would just get on the back end. Is that correct?
It is correct that ultimately there's a STRIDE, there's a $2 surcharge in the STRIDE charge. And then when they go into a rate base, that surcharge is reset to zero and those costs are moved into rate base. But yes, it all has to be approved by the Public Service Commission. The one point that STRIDE does have in the statute is it sets a state policy of replacing all that infrastructure. So it's basically says we're taking the gas infrastructure that was in place in 2013 and we're going to build a new system. And part of what
but on that, David, that's not on the utilities, that's on the legislature.
It is all approved by the Public Service Commission.
No, the policy.
It
was essentially, in order for this to go away, the legislature would need to pass some sort of law or whatever to say, we're getting out of this business. Don't do anything more. I mean, that's a simplified way of saying it. but we can't assume through whatever, whatever things we've got, 2030 and so forth, we can't assume, and they certainly can't assume that gas is going to be taken out until the legislature passes a bill saying so. Don't they have to continue to act as if we do have a gas system in place until we don't?
I would disagree somewhat with that. I don't want to get too far off track because the Public Service Commission in the statute has to find that their STRIDE plans are prudent and reasonable. And because these costs are, that's the STRIDE plan itself. And then the costs themselves, when they're moved into the utilities rate base, they also have to be found to have been prudently incurred. So I think that there is room within the current statute for the Public Service Commission to say costs that are going to be recovered for this fossil fuel infrastructure over 40, 50, 60, 70 years, when we know gas consumption is declining, is not reasonable and prudent. So I do think that the current statute does leave room for the Public Service Commission to make decisions based on whether those plans are reasonable and prudent now. However, I would generally agree that legislation would be very helpful here. And I'm going to get to that with, we have some suggestions that I'll get to at the end about modifications to the STRIDE statute that I think are in line with what you're suggesting in terms of legislative change.
Thank you.
If I can keep going a little bit, I mean, go ahead, Michael. I don't want to be too, I think there'll be time for some discussion here, but go ahead.
Yeah, I was just, Comptroller Davis's questions rose, that this is very contentious, obviously, in the General Assembly about the STRIDE program. And I just didn't know whether we were going to hear the other side of the arguments from BGE or any of the other utilities, because obviously before we vote, I would suggest we should hear from all the interested parties.
I'm going to defer on that to Mark and others and try and keep going here.
Yeah, well, and the recommendation that Mr. Lapp is making in this presentation is on the schedule for the mitigation working group to discuss possibly October 19th. I forget now the date. So this is this presentation is to introduce this topic, but know that the recommendation is already scheduled to be vetted by the mitigation working group. BGE is represented on that working group.
Yeah, that's really what triggered the question, because I know we're going to consider these with both sides being heard. And I didn't realize that it was going to be presented to the commission before the mitigation working group had a chance to hear from both sides and at least provide our recommendation.
I'd like to make a recommendation that David finish his presentation so we know what the proposal is, because I think this is a lot of background information that is helpful, but so perhaps we can just continue.
Yeah,
Madam Chair.
please.
Okay.
Let's just continue.
Okay.
Questions at the end. Questions at the end.
So and again, this is not about, criticizing the utilities. This is explaining what is going on. And utilities are private companies, and as they should, they work to, please their investors, and they're regulated monopolies. And so it's the state's job to guide them, I guess is a good term. So right now, if BG has a current rate case proposal, and that would increase gas capital spending in 2026 by 73% from 2021 levels. So the point here is that this spending on gas infrastructure is accelerating. It's not slowing. And I have on the right here, this is from Exelon's investor presentation. And in the bottom underneath, it should say BGE capital spending on its gas system they're telling their investors it's going from 475 million a year in 2023 to increasing to 550 million in 2026. So we're going in sort of the direction of increased fossil fuel infrastructure spending. If you go to the next slide, thank you. So this shows, let's start with the right side. The bar graph on the right side is essentially like the principal on your mortgage in the analogy I discussed earlier. So every day more money is spent on gas infrastructure, and it's like sort of like a new mortgage every day. And that's what this shows. And it shows the baseline is business as usual. So that's our model. And again, that's conservative. We use straight line growth as opposed to compound growth, which is really where we are right now with compound growth. And that's what the utilities talk about with their investors is compound growth, but that would have these charts going way up, and you know, they would be very steep. So we modeled a conservative growth, and so we have the base case there. That's business as usual, and our base case last year would have been where we are at the 25% reduction, which is why I have the 25% increase at the top, because that really could be where we're really headed. And so what we've done here is just shown some numbers for what the revenue requirement is. So on the far side of this graph on the left, you see 2022, 2023. And that 1 billion, a little over 1 billion is what is recovered from utility customers each year to pay for just this capital infrastructure. So that is divided among gas sales. So to arrive at the rate, you take the little over 1 billion and you divide it by the gas sales. So because of the spending, this number is increasing, and it's driving rate increases that have already been going on, are happening now. Delivery costs have gone up significantly over the last 10 years, but this shows where it's going. And this is just basic math that shows that, you know, by around 2050, we could be at almost triple the revenue requirement. And that would essentially triple rates if gas consumption stayed the same. But if gas consumption declines, as we know it needs to meet state climate goals, then rates will have to go up even higher. So we have fewer customers that have to pay for the same fixed costs of the utility. So that's going to drive rate increases. And ultimately, we think that's not sustainable. Rates will get too high for people. And the people who can't afford to will get off the gas system and will electrify, and lower income people will be stuck on the system paying increasingly exorbitant rates. We don't think that's sustainable, and ultimately there'll be stranded costs. If we go to the next slide, this is sort of a little microcosm or micro illustration of what's going on. And you can see here in the picture, in the middle picture is a gas service line going to a residence in Baltimore. And on the right, you see a gas regulator and meter. And so for every house that's on gas, as part of the STRIDE program, you need to replace the service line, and they get a gas regulator and a new meter. And so we calculated some of the costs of that based on information from BGE, and the average cost since June 2021, and this is just the principal, is $6,343 of capital cost per house on average. So the full cost of that investment is recovered over 50 years at a cost of more than $19,000 per house. So a customer that electrifies, those investments will become essentially useless, and costs are potentially shifted to the remaining gas customers. And that's just the individual building costs. But the full costs are what each customer contributes to the gas main that you see on your left, and a lot of other system-wide costs. So these are costs that just simply could be avoided if that customer electrifies or says that the customer wants to electrify. And I have more on that on the next slide. So this is part of a report that we issued, a different report than the gas spending report from last November, that shows that electrification and with a heat pump, you're cooling your home as well as heating your home, and the costs of that, or the average cost for that. This is an LBNL laboratory, and it's consistent with some information I was just looking at the other day from the Department of Energy, which has the average cost of a heat pump at about $8,000. And that replaces 2 appliances. And the replacement cost of a gas furnace and an air conditioning unit is on average around $11,000. And that's a heat pump, by the way, in the lower left-hand corner. Those are costs that don't include rebates, tax incentives, other incentives that might be available for electrification. And these new heat pumps, the technology is evolving, and it's expected to evolve further, and they don't require backup. The cold climate models do not require any sort of backup heating, and they're very efficient to operate. And the top graph on the right shows 2010 to 2020. If you can read that, it shows how electric in that time period, before all these rebates and before the CSNA, electric, this is home heating, electric has already been gaining market share on gas. And that means that, electric, we're selling more electricity and less gas, which affects the revenue requirements for both gas and electric customers. If you could move to the next slide, Mark, and just these are the Climate Commission's recommendations from last year. Some of them are more than last year. Some of them, I think, are 2 years old, and we're supporting these recommendations again because they are still outstanding. They have not been implemented. So one is the gas utility transition planning. That was part of last year. I have the page numbers here from last year's annual report. The elimination of gas appliance incentives in Empower, and also allowing fuel switching within Empower, and then reforms to gas line extension policy, because right now, current ratepayers essentially provide a subsidy to new customers to sign on to the system based on how the calculations are done for new customers, because there's an assumption that those new gas customers are going to be on the system using the same levels of gas, same amount of gas that they have been using historically, when we can reasonably anticipate that gas usage is going to decline. And that the expectation is generally for most of the utilities around 30 years of gas usage for that gas customer to contribute the amount back that is being paid to attach that customer to the system. So the last slide here is a new recommendation, and this is what we'll be presenting to the mitigation working group. And this is about modifying the STRIDE program. As you recall from the first slide, showing that STRIDE is being used as a wholesale approach to just replace all the pipes in a community. What we're suggesting is a recommendation that we actually prioritize the riskiest pipe on the system. So we would want the Public Service Commission to have the gas companies do a cost effectiveness test and a risk assessment analysis, so that the most riskiest pipes, the most leak prone pipes, are the pipes that are prioritized. So we move from we're replacing the entire system. We're going to do that for the next 20 years at a super high cost. And instead, we're going to focus on prioritizing the riskiest pipe. And then we want to look at other alternatives to replacement. That would include leak detection and repair, which is much less costly and can be targeted on the risk. And targeted replacement, some replacement undoubtedly will be necessary, and also electrification as lower cost alternatives to the replacement program. We would also want to see a heightened analysis for locations that might be retired because of electrification, something that the Public Service Commission could consider in evaluating replacement proposals. And also notice requirements for customer-specific STRIDE work to allow customers who want to move off the system to be able to do that and avoid excessive costs on replacing the system. So I covered a lot, and I appreciate all your patience, and I'm happy to answer any questions and open to discussion.
Thank you. That was a good presentation. So how to open this
Yeah,
up?
a couple of points here. One, the new recommendation that was presented, again, that's going to be vetted at the mitigation working group. So I think no need to dive into discussion on the final recommendation. There was your point, David, and this has come up with the commission before. There are recommendations that the commission has made in the past where we have not seen action, right? And in the past, the commission has at times said, we want to elevate this recommendation that we've made in the past and put it again in this annual report and kind of double down on it. So I guess this is a very general flag that if there's anything that the commission has recommended in the past, look back at the previous annual reports. And if you say, we need to continue to advocate for this and not just let it, sleep in last year's annual report, then flag those as well for consideration for the commission to put in the annual report this year. So I think that's one process reaction to your recommendation, David, that those recommendations that you presented, those three that the commission's already made, passed, be considered again for this year's annual report.
Okay, so
I'm sorry.
go ahead.
I was just going to say that I know that I packed a lot in there. So any commissioners, anybody should feel free to reach out to me directly if you have further questions or are confused by anything that I presented, because I know there's a lot there.
Okay, thank you for that. Do we have another presentation of slides or not?
Not of slides. David Smedik, you submitted some comments generally about this funding discussion, but they seem to tie pretty closely with some of the themes from David Lapp's presentation. So I wonder if you want to kind of layer on there. Go ahead.
But before that, just because we're running out of time, can we just give you maybe 3 minutes? I do want to open it up so we can have a full discussion on ideas, funding ideas, and any questions that we have and follow up. So please go.
Absolutely. No, thank you, Madam Secretary. And yes, I don't have slides, so I apologize. I did have this on my phone, so I apologize if there are any spelling mistakes in the document that Mark graciously circulated. But I similarly, when the question was posed to us at the last meeting about funding and about similarly kind of near-term actions that we can be recommending as a commission to the governor, to the General Assembly and the agencies on how we can make near-term action the next 3, 4, 5 years, getting to that 2031 goal. And reading admittedly some of the headlines out there about belt tightening around budget potential needs and everything in our state moving forward. I really sat and thought about, okay, if I'm approaching this from the perspective of a budget that I'm not going out personally to get a new job, to go get more money, we might not be getting as much revenue at different times. Where am I spending money? Where is the state of Maryland already spending money that may not actually be helping us meet our targets? I actually think for my own part, for what Commissioner Lapp just presented, that's the one that keeps me up at night personally. Billions and billions of dollars into fossil fuel infrastructure that is intended to last for another 70 plus years. That the math simply doesn't add up. So I knew that Commissioner Lapp has talked about that for years in front of this commission, and I figured he would be bringing it to this discussion. So today, what I tried to do was look at other programs that I knew of at the state that still allow at different ways or are actively continuing to invest and incentivize public dollars, state dollars into fossil fuel infrastructure that is actively pushing us against our targets. And I highlighted a few in here. Lots of these programs actually do great things, but they have pieces within them that can continue to support negative outcomes when it comes to emission reductions. So the Strategic Energy Investment Fund, as an example, funds wildly wonderful things in the state, but there are opportunities to continue to support fossil fuel infrastructure, appliances, et cetera, within it. That should not be the case any longer. So recommending to the governor to stop that at this point on any current spending, and then to the General Assembly to actually amend the statute governing CEF so that we are ensuring that there are only zero emission activities associated with that program. And I provided some information there on that in the document. I would also, on that, because I know there's a lot of discussion there, CEF also funds a lot of direct bill assistance to low-income households in Maryland. That's good. There are ways that we can address how effective that is by ensuring that there are more retrofits to low-income households that need that bill assistance. But I think that so I wasn't trying to like hammer away at direct bill assistance within that recommendation. Open to discussion around how the exact wording needs to be there. The other one that I wanted to highlight was the Renewable Portfolio Standard. This has been a discussion for about 15 plus years, 20 years since the program has been part of our climate action plan in Maryland. We removed black liquor as a qualifying resource from the state's RPS a couple years ago. It has been proposed year after year after year after year after year as heavily politicized, I admit, in Annapolis, this issue. But here in this Climate Commission, we see every single year the greenhouse gas emissions inventory, and we see waste combustion as 1 million metric tons of give or take every single year. That is not decreasing. We are sending millions of dollars of ratepayer money, of public money, to waste combustion facilities in the state of Maryland because of the RPS. We should remove that, and we can have millions of more dollars flowing to clean electricity options within the RPS. Similarly, when the state is looking at its operations, as well as its funding, its contracting, et cetera, we should be ensuring that those dollars that we are putting out for infrastructure investments into our buildings, into other energy infrastructure, are about clean energy, and they're about zero emission technologies. So if we're working with the Maryland Environmental Service, in the past, we've actually had state contracts that have gone over budget and had to use general funds that support long-lasting fossil fuel infrastructure. That shouldn't be the case anymore. We should be ensuring that we're doing that in a way that actually invests in clean electricity and clean energy programs. In addition to that, I mentioned the Empower Maryland program, and Commissioner Lapp did as well. You've had, again, for years now, the commission has been recommending to the General Assembly, to the Public Service Commission, to end subsidies for fossil fuel appliances within that program and many more. And so that is just, I think, another one that we need to reiterate this year from the commission again, maybe a little bit more forcefully in some way, shape, or form. And then lastly, we've talked about for a number of years in the commission, state government leadership. So we've seen some good examples now. I do a lot of federal work. So looking at the White House and the executive power of the president, executive orders for sustainability and federal government, we could mirror that a lot better, I think, here at the state level. Mandating zero emission buildings. There are definitions that the federal government now has on the books for that can be replicated here at the state level. For zero carbon electricity, definitions from the federal level that can be drawn here to the state level. Same for transportation, and directives under the executive power, the executive order power of the presidency. For the federal agencies to do this, we can do the same here for the state government. So I've put some language together. I might have missed a couple pieces in there, and I want additional discussion, whether it's in the mitigation working group, in our discussions here. So I would love to talk about a little bit more in those spaces. And I included, again, a number of these recommendations are either directly from previous commission reports or very related in the spirit of, and maybe they include, if one was about buildings, maybe it includes transportation at this point. Because when I'm looking at our 60% by 2031 target, and what the MDE and the other agencies have asked us to do as the commission for climate, we need to be making sure that we're spending the existing money we have smartly, in addition to all of the other funds that we get from the federal government, et cetera. So try to condense it. I don't know if I hit 3 minutes though.
Didn't, but that's all right. Thank you. Maybe we can open it up for discussion.
Madam Chair, before we move off of this, I just want to make sure that everyone's 100% aware that my silence with respect to the presentation that David just made has nothing to do with Exelon's acquiescence to whether that's accurate or the right way to go. It's because I didn't know about this until I walked in this afternoon. So I'm very glad to hear that PGE will be given an opportunity to sort of respond to this and provide their own opinion so that the commission has a fuller view of what's going on. So thank you.
No, that's great. Absolutely.
Just a few minutes. I'm Chris Rice, Chief of Staff at the Maryland Energy Administration, sitting in for Director Paul Penske today. I just wanted to address a couple of things that David brought up, and I really appreciate the comments and the recommendations. And you mentioned you would like to see some action now. I just wanted to bring a couple of things to everybody's attention. The Maryland Energy Administration's mission has always been to promote clean, affordable, reliable energy. But a couple months ago, we actually updated that to also include energy-related greenhouse gas emissions and their reductions, as well as equity. And so the base that we're looking at everything has changed a bit from our mission. You also mentioned fossil fuel related programs that have in the past been run under MEA. We are discontinuing the combined heat and power program as a grant program, as well as the Maryland Energy Infrastructure Program, which was directed by a Public Service Commission order under the Washington Gas and Electric merger that happened a few years ago. The legislature last year directed any fund balances that were left over from that pot of money to go back to WGL to assist them. I'm not sure if it's specifically with a stride, but it is to assist them with fixing leaky pipes. So the only other fossil related funding that MEA has provided, and we do plan on providing in the future, is a very narrow pathway for difficult to electrify technologies and processes. Think very high heat in manufacturing, as well as resiliency. So think about hospitals, and a hospital is going to have backup power. It's either going to be a oil burning furnace, or it's going to be a natural gas. So in our commercial and industrial grant program this year, we are allowing a very narrow path, but sort of like the David Lapp's presentation recommendations. If we get in an application, we are going to make those applicants justify on a technological aspect why they aren't going electric. So just a few.
Yeah, no, thank you, Chris. And I regret not being able to send this over to you beforehand because you answered some of my questions. So that was good. I still think there's some wiggle room. So happy to talk more about it. Thank you for that. That's really helpful.
Okay, so we're going to move on and open it up in a second, but Mark, I know you have to leave, but unfortunately, I can only give you maybe 1 minute to give us your funding ideas, because we do want to open it up. Okay, go fast.
I'm going to go as quick as I can. You can cut me off at any time. And I appreciate the forbearance with my schedule. Just one thought was, local governments and state government are great partners to accomplish things throughout history in the state of Maryland. And the state government isn't the only government in the state that has climate action goals and climate action plans. Right? Many of the Maryland's counties do as well. And I would offer that perhaps there's a way to capture the goals of the county's climate action plans that are already out there, to the extent they are using methods and practices beyond the mandates that the state already puts out. Between now and 2045, certainly more Maryland counties will have climate action plans with goals that they will reach to varying degrees. So to the extent the counties will be doing some of that work, maybe the goalpost the state is trying to achieve could be moved a little closer and the gap won't be as large as it looks today. So that's one. The other one is I know the Climate Change Commission's goal is not only to reduce or to combat the negative impacts of climate change in the state, but it's also to improve the climate change economy, to do it in a way that we don't hurt the economy. That's a very important one that doesn't get discussed enough, I think, at commission meetings. Right. So I offer something to the extent that it's an example very much like tax increment financing, right? To the extent we spend money to reach climate goals, but also improve the economy, right? To the extent there's a net improvement in the economy, right? That amount of tax money that is generated from that net increase in the economy could be used to help reach climate goals, either from the forms of debt service on projects or practices through money to state agencies that put practices in place to help reach the goals, or perhaps new people to help manage the effort and educate the public toward the private sector practices. So kind of like tax increment financing, but as we improve the economy, because that's a goal, maybe we need to talk about that more. As we reach that goal, using that incremental increase to help fund the improvements that are necessary to reach the overall goals. Thirdly, we've talked about different groups. Mark was mentioning earlier that benefit from improvements in the climate. We mentioned health or sick days saved, I think, and talked about that. So just like an insurance company will go ahead and offer wellness programs because it means cost savings to them, right? In the future, perhaps there are benefits in improving the climate to the medical insurance industry and the housing insurance industry from maybe a lower projection sea level rise, right? Less problems to houses, less frequent and intense storms than are currently being projected if climate goals are met. Maybe there are savings in home insurance and health insurance that could be captured to some degree to help fund the effort as we move forward. And then lastly, just a thought, we talked a little bit earlier about those 3 states that also had adaptation and resilience projects in your numbers. Certainly Maryland's local governments spend a lot of time and attention on resilience and adaptation measures, especially the ones along the coast. And capturing that data would be helpful and more complete and more accurate as a statewide effort. And it would be helpful in our public relations efforts, counties, public as well, to show the total Maryland government effort toward reaching the goal.
Okay, thank you for that.
Will you submit those in writing?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so to get a pulse of how many people have questions and want to contribute, since we have, thank you again, 7 minutes left or 8 minutes. I'm curious in this room first, just raise your hand if you would like to comment or if you have some thoughts. I just want to see where we are. Just 2 people?
I'll defer to let others.
I have to defer. No, I just want to get so you would be 4, right? What about online?
Oh boy.
Can I raise your hand online if you would have wanted to contribute to this conversation today?
From the commission members, we have hands up from a couple of commission members online.
How many?
3.
3. And then the rest are from public. So,
And we have to vote.
and we have, So this is a really important subject. And when we have presentations, it doesn't give us and you all time to really talk and get deep into the conversation. So I guess let's try and prioritize the commissioners for, really, we only have 2 minutes because we have to open it up 5 minutes for public comment, right? So maybe I can call on just 2 people, just 2 minutes. That's it. If you can go less than 2 minutes, because I have to stop at 2:55, it's 2:53. Go ahead.
5 ideas in 1 minute. The more PR we do on things people can get federal incentives to, the more we can get in sales tax from selling EVs and electric. So more money on PR to get people to buy those things, number 1.
Okay.
Number 2, gas tax is unpopular, but higher registration fees for low mileage cars, trucks, and recreational boats. Next, to really look at cap and invest. And also would like to think about having a checkoff where people can choose when they pay their taxes to contribute to the fund.
Love it. Thank you. Okay, we have 1 minute. Who do you see?
So two things. One is spend money to get money. And I loved the conversation earlier of Mr. Walker and Dr. Goodwin and others about promoting the IRA and incentives. We probably need to go deeper and have navigators. So similar to Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, whatever you want to call it. We had people that actually made those connections, and probably we're going to go farther if we have those touch points. Second thing is, this may be, a wild idea, but it's on the books already in Maryland as a funding source, sort of a carbon attachment of a carbon fee. And that is wondering if our hazard mitigation funding, especially for oil disasters and cleanup, whether that could be expanded. It's a fossil fuel. It's directed specifically at fossil fuels, at crude oil. Could it be expanded for other kinds of fossil fuels that pass through Maryland? We're a huge export state in that. We, talk with a lot of our I'm with the Able Foundation, Beth Harbor. We talk with a lot of our community partners that are in neighborhoods heavily impacted EJ communities by coal trains, and just wonder whether that's something that is already on the books and could be expanded in some way without litigation, interstate commerce interference, et cetera.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. All right, we have 4 minutes left, so we have to respect the public process. Would you open it up?
Sure. We have hands up from several people. It's not crystal clear unless you put it in the chat if those hands are up to make a public comment. I do see, let's see, I'll go to Woody first, who asked to make a public comment. Woody, go ahead. You have 1 minute, please.
I'm sorry, I did not ask for public comment. I wanted an email address to submit them after the meeting is over. And Susan Stacy has put it up.
Got it. Okay, thank you very much. Jennifer Kuntz.
Yes, thank you so much. My name is Jennifer Kunze, and I'm the Maryland Organizing Director with Clean Water Action. A number of us are here today to urge you to make recommendations about incineration, biogas, and biomass. We hope that the Commission will recommend that the General Assembly adopt legislation to remove these polluters from the RPS. I'll be quick to get to other commenters, so I'll put some supporting information in the chat. But notably, incineration per unit of energy produces more pollution than any other power source. And the local governments that are impacted by incineration support this policy. And by the same token, we should eliminate incentives for the biogas and biomass industries. We cannot afford to make the same mistake with these industries now that we made with incineration decades ago. There are parallel recommendations regarding the pathway report that I'll submit in writing. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Let's see, I've got Carlos for public comment.
Yes, hi. How you doing? My name is Carlos Sanchez. I just want to add a little bit more onto what Jennifer Kunze said. I am a resident of the Lakeland community in South Baltimore, and being so close to trash incineration really has an impact to the residents and the communities, not just in Lakeland. I've done outreach to communities in South Baltimore, like Curtis Bay, Brooklyn, and they all are saying the same thing. They don't want to live near trash incineration, and burning trash leads to lung cancer, asthma, and other respiratory issues, and residents want no more trash incineration in their communities. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And yeah, I think that we are almost out of time, so I think the last public comment will go to
hear from Charles Washington.
All right, we have sorry if I missed that in the chat. So Charles Washington. I'm sorry, you've got your hand up. Yes, go ahead, sir.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity. Charles Washington listening today on behalf of BGE. I hadn't expected to speak today, so I will be brief. I know you're out of time. Two commissioners discussed recommendations that directly reference BGE in our efforts to provide safe and reliable service to over half of the residents and businesses in the state. I understand those proposals will be delegated to the mitigation work group, and we will certainly participate to add balance to those discussions. Our aim is to do our best to ensure that the mitigation work group and ultimately this commission have the information you need to make informed decisions. We're committed to helping the state achieve its decarbonization goals, and we're working towards pathways to achieve those goals at the lowest possible cost to our customers. Given the misrepresentation of our position and our efforts that you've heard today, I wanted to be sure to offer all of you collectively the opportunity to hear about the work BGE is doing to help achieve the 2031 and 2045 goals, or alternatively, speak with any individual members of the commission who are interested. We didn't know that these recommendations would be on the agenda today, but we really would ask that the commission offer equal time to alternative positions and pathways to decarbonization. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. All right, go ahead.
Just have a,
No.
thank you. Madam Secretary, I just want to echo the thanks that you provided to Dr. Goodwin and his contributions to this commission, as well as in so many other environmental forums, have been immense, and we will miss him. And just want to say thank you for all you've done for Maryland's environment and the climate, Peter. We miss you, but best luck in your future endeavors.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. we will. Okay, with that, we're out of time. So, meeting is adjourned.